with some sunshine. Shouldn't feel too bad at all on Monday. That gives way to a rather blustery and unsettled week ahead. Andrew.
Thank you very much. Now, at the Tory party conference, there was one irrepressible, ebullient figure with a boyish haircut patrolling the fringe and wowing the conference floor. I'm not talking about Boris Johnson, but one of his greatest admirers, Ruth Davidson, and she's with me now. Ruth Davidson, the fallout from the conference is still all over the papers. Lots and lots of calls in different papers for some kind of major reshaping or reshuffling of the government. Is the Prime Minister strong enough to do that?
Well, first of all, Andrew, welcome to Glasgow. It's great to see you here. The Prime Minister, absolutely. The makeup of her cabinet is entirely within her purview, and people serve within cabinet at the pleasure of the Prime Minister, whoever it is. Now, you've seen some quite unfortunate shenanigans this week in terms of a couple of people trying to push, but the pushback has been pretty strong. We're behind the Prime Minister. She's the best person to lead us forward.
You said that the plotters should get back in their box. And so far, they have got back into their boxes for the time being. I mean, who knows what's ahead, but for the time being. But as I say, there are two things. Would you like to see some fresh blood in the cabinet?
Well, look, I think,
faces.
you know, I'm not going to play fantasy cabinet on a television show. That's not my job. Nor do I think that it's particularly helpful. The Prime Minister knows exactly what talent she has in her ranks. I believe there's a great deal of talent on the Green benches on the Conservative side. And of course, you want to see people get on and get up. But you've got to have the right person in the right portfolio doing the right job. Because one of the things that's really angered me this week, particularly with all of the sort of movement and tittle-tattle in the papers, is folks seem to have forgotten that we are really lucky to be able to serve our country as politicians, whether that's in opposition like myself or in government like my colleagues. And it's all about delivering for the country, is not and should never be about private ambition.
Well, I absolutely want to come on to that. Do you think Boris Johnson is the right person in the right job?
Well, look, he's come out this week to say that he's fully behind every dot, comma, T and word of the Florence speech.
Do you believe him?
Well, you know, I want to see the Prime Minister hold him to that. And he's also been, both publicly and privately, and then because this was a WhatsApp group, privately became publicly, said that we need to circle the wagons and realise that, you know, the opposition is not on our own benches, it's sitting across the seat in the Commons. And I think he's right about that. So, you know, he's a big intellect, he's a big figure in the party. And if the Prime Minister believes he's the right person to be Foreign Secretary, then she has my full support.
You made clear in your speech that you thought the government also needed a slight change in direction when it came to policy. You said, 10 years since the crash, it's time to show working families across the UK, from a tenement in Glasgow to a one-bed in Grantham, that we have got their back.
Absolutely.
Now, a very similar message came out this morning from Sir John Major, the former Prime Minister, and he talked about the need for more ambition and more aggression when it comes to things like housing, infrastructure projects, but he also said about universal credit, that he thought that although it was theoretically impeccable as a reform, it is operationally messy, socially unfair and unforgiving. It is time for the Conservative Party to show its heart again, which is too often concealed by financial prudence. Do you agree with him?
Well, I agree with John Major on many things. I think with the issue that he's got with universal credit is actually one that was addressed at the party conference, and it might have been slightly missed in all of the melee, but I thought the announcement from David Gauke that on the implementation phase there was going to be a big change to that. So there had been a situation where you could have to wait up to 6 weeks for money if you found yourself in a situation where you first required universal credit. That's been scrapped, and it's now going to be moved up to payment in advance to 5 days. Now, I think that will make a huge difference. And the one thing that I would take issue with Sir John, if I could just finish this, the issue that he says is about it being unforgiving. Actually, the whole point of universal credit is that it's not. It replaces a system wherein if you worked beyond a certain number of hours, your benefits would fall off a cliff edge. The whole point about universal credit is that it's a tapering system, so that even as you go up the scales, you don't lose all the money, it tapers as well. So it always pays you to be in work. And that is the point of it. And I absolutely support the principle behind that.
So you don't, unlike him, you don't want a review of universal credit itself?
Well, I think big programmes of government should always be kept under constant review. And like I say, I think one of the things that got lost in the conference was this announcement by the Chief Secretary, sorry, the DWP Minister, David Gauke, which I think was the right thing to do. Also, I would say, again, in Scotland, because we're here in sunny Scotland, is that we've made slight changes to it, because we have the ability to change welfare here.
And the SNP,
the Scottish government,
to them, have made a change which helps that 6-week problem at the beginning of universal credit being run up.
Well, one of the things that they've done is they said that rather than just paying monthly, monthly, there's also the opportunity to pay fortnightly. Now, we as a party supported that in the Scottish Parliament because that's an ability to make it a more flexible system. But in terms of changing the 6-week issue, that's been done by the UK government, and it's now a maximum of 5 days.
When it comes to other things that you mentioned in your speech as well, a big new programme of housing, you were channeling Harold Macmillan at one point. You were saying, back after the war, you know, we built lots of houses, and certainly in the 1950s, Britain was a lot poorer, and yet Harold Macmillan and the Conservative governments then managed to build 300,000 new homes every year. Is that the kind of ambition that you're looking for?
Well, what you saw from the UK government was talking about putting £9 billion into social housing, making it easier for private rent, and also £10 billion into Help to Buy. So you saw all for private renters and for people using the social housing model and for people using private purchase of housing. You saw help on all three fronts because it's not one single thing that will help. One of the things that I said in Scotland, and this varies slightly from the government, is I did a big speech earlier this year talking about, in my opinion, in Scotland, where we also have pressures on housing, but we also have quite a lot of space. We have 8.3% of the population, but a third of the landmass. I've said we need to go even more boldly than that. We need to build a new generation of new towns, like we did post-war with the East Kilbrides and the Cumbernaulds and the Glenrothas of this world. And I think that we can do that. Isn't
this the kind of thing the government in London should be doing as well? Because if you actually look at the numbers, they're talking about an extra 5,000 new homes a year, which is nothing like the ambition that...
No, I don't think that's fair. And in terms of the numbers itself, you're looking at, if you're saying that you can only get 5,000 homes out of a £9 billion investment, then these are the least affordable homes that you're talking about in the history of building. But what I am saying is that in Scotland, and this is a devolved issue, I do want to see that level of ambition. I want to make sure that we take on, yes, the NIMBYism within local council areas and with some people who are already on the housing ladder, but that we go even more boldly than that and we start that new building for that new generation. And I also think that we're getting to a tipping point on housing as well, because for those people who have worked hard, made sacrifices, got on the housing ladder, want to protect, what they've built up, actually these are the same people that are now realising that their children are continuing to live with them until deep into their 20s, sometimes into their 30s, because they haven't got the same opportunities. So I think even that level of quite understandable protectionism about what you've built is changing in public perceptions too. And I think the government can lead public opinion on that as well as lead in the building process itself.
What is your vision for Britain after Brexit? I'm not talking about transitional arrangements or all the detail, but I'm saying, where do we stand in the world after Brexit?
Well, I've always said that I wanted an open Brexit. I want us to be a beacon in the world of liberalism in terms of trade, in terms of attracting the best talent, in terms of shouldering our burden in the world when it comes to international development, in terms of making sure that we continue to sit at the top table of the UN and of NATO, and that we do our bit, and that we continue to use the soft powers we have of one of the great cultural countries in the world in terms of our exports in music and in culture and in art and in playwrights and in television and even in journalism, Andrew.
Thank you. You've also said that Scottish businesses and Scottish farmers must have maximum possible access to the single market. That should carry on after we have left the EU.
As much as I would love to claim that for myself, I was quoting Theresa May in her Lancaster House speech, which is what she said too.
Do you accept that to do that, we have to shadow or mimic or at least adopt EU regulatory changes during that period?
Well, I think what's important is to make sure that we work out a deal with the EU, and as you know, the negotiations are going on as we speak, to ensure that they're happy what we're offering and we're happy what they're offering. But I tell you what, you speak to farmers themselves, and it's not in their interest, it's not in consumers' interest for us to have any drop in food standards, and that's not the government's position. We want to ensure that we've got high quality, good provenance, and particularly for Scotland, where we get value add for some of the tremendous food and drink exports that we have. A lot of that is based upon the idea that we go above and beyond the rules that already exist within the EU.
But if we want maximum access to the single market, and I assume that you now don't want to be part of the single market, you accept that's gone.
Well,
if we want maximum
I'm a free trader. What I've always said is I want free trade for Scottish and British businesses. One of the reasons I was a Remainer was because that already existed, and the framework for that existing was the free market, and was the single market, but it had the 4 freedoms that were attached to it, so it had lots of other things that went with it. If we can get to a point where Scottish and British businesses are being able to operate within and to trade freely with the EU 27 and other around the world under under a different framework, and the framework put forward by the government is a free trade agreement, then I'm absolutely fine with that.
But
the mechanism
you know perfectly,
the mechanism isn't what concerns me, Andrew. It's the results. I want
Absolutely.
Scottish businesses to be able to trade freely.
But in real practical terms, if we're going to have access to that single market, then we have to shadow their regulations. To get that, is that worth doing?
Well, I think that in many cases we already go beyond them. And I think that one of the fallacies about Brexit is this idea that somehow we didn't have agency in writing these rules, that these weren't the rules that we wanted. In many cases, we wanted even tougher rules because, you know, we are a country that chooses not, and rightly, chooses not to try and compete on the lowest possible labour costs, but chooses to trade on the highest quality product. And I think that that is a correct future for Britain.
I watched your speech at the Manchester conference, and I talked to representatives afterwards. There's a lot of them are desperate for you to come down south and, in their view, save the party. And you've said, no, 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 it's too lonely a job. I prefer to stay in Scotland. And that might sound a little bit selfish, frankly. Well,
that's very kind of you. I'm not sure that Prime Ministers are decided on the Andrew Marr programme, and we have a very good Prime Minister who I support and have always supported. I support her in the leadership, I support her now, I support her to the future. But I know what my job is, and I would say very kindly to my colleagues down south that the job was quite important, and they saw themselves in June that getting 13 MPs from Scotland meant that we still have a Conservative in number 10. So, you know, I would gently remind them that the job I've got here is a pretty big job. I know what it is, and I know what I'm trying to achieve for the future here. And it remains a difficult job. In the opinion polling, you've been overtaken by the Labour Party in Scotland. You're no longer number 2. Is the air going out of the Ruth Davidson bubble just a little bit? Well, it's the Scottish Conservative bubble. It's never been the Ruth Davidson bubble. But I have to say, I do laugh on the grounds that the same polls and the same commentators had us in third before the election last year, where we beat the Labour Party at a canter. None of them said that we were going to get 13 MPs this time just in June. So I know how to campaign. I don't concern myself with polls, and if anybody thinks they know what's going to happen in 3.5 years from now in Scottish politics, then they haven't been watching the last 3.5 years, because it moves pretty quickly here. But I accept that we've got more to do. I absolutely accept the Scottish Conservatives have done a good job showing that we can be a strong opposition. We've now got to take that next step to be an alternative party of government, a credible alternative government for this country, and that's what all our focus is going to be in the next 3 years. We read in today's papers that we are heading for no deal and the government is preparing for that. Are you relaxed about no deal? Well, I think it's in everybody's interest to get a deal, but I think the government should prepare for all eventualities. What would no deal mean for Scotland? Well, again, I mean, I think that we should be putting, you know, as much effort into ensuring that the negotiations are continuing, and quite away. And I think I should say to your viewers at home, Andrew, quite away from the people that walk up to the microphones and have to speak to their home audience. As I understand it, the officials in the room are making actually quite a lot of good progress. So would you agree with the Chancellor when he said no deal would be very, very bad for ordinary families and businesses across the UK? Well, I don't think it's the optimum, but I think that the country decided to leave the EU. Now, I didn't vote for that, but we've got to respect the country's decision. I want us to get a deal. I think it's not just in our interests. I think it's in the EU's interest. I think that the UK has gone a long way in that Florence speech to show its flexibility. I would like to see some flexibility in return from the EU 27. But, you know, I would prefer to get a deal than no deal. You used to be a great advocate for staying inside the single market. You were very vociferous when you were arguing with Boris Johnson, and then for being as close to the single market as possible. Now we are heading for the opposite kind of direction, and you guys seem to have given up the fight. Well, I don't see it as a fight at all. I've spent 3.5 years in Scotland talking about how the fact Nicola Sturgeon, your next guest, doesn't get to just rerun a referendum because she lost. Now, you're right, I absolutely put my shoulder to the wheel on the Remain campaign, but I respect the result of the country. The reason that you take something to a referendum is because you decide that it's not just for politicians. Every single person should make a decision for themselves and their family about what they believe the future should be. Now, I voted for something differently, but as a Democrat, I respect the result that this country gave, and my job is to make it work to the best of my ability, and that's what I'm trying to do. Can a Scot ever again lead the British Conservative Party? Oh, absolutely, without a doubt. Can anybody who is not sitting in the House... Michael Gove even tried. Can anybody who is not sitting in the House of Commons lead the British Conservative Party? Well, not under the current constitution, no. So are there any circumstances at all, ever, in which you would sit for a Westminster seat?
Serious question.
Well, actually, I tried in 2010. I stood in Glasgow and came fourth. So, you know, maybe that's an indication of where we lie. But no, I mean,
it's not an answer to my question.
Well, look, I've got a job at the moment. I am not looking past 2021. I'm trying to build a party that was third, in some cases fourth, when I became leader, to build it up to be a credible government of Scotland. I've come a long way in that. I've got a long way still to go. I've built a really good team that I'm immensely proud of. So I know what my job is, and this is my job right now. But, you know, I'm looking to 2021 and I'm not looking past it because there's quite a few things in the in-tray right now, Andrew.
OK, but a lot of people will be listening to that and hearing those words right now. Ruth Davidson, for now, thank you very much indeed. Since the Brexit referendum, Nicola Sturgeon has been issuing warnings to London. Listen to Scotland or else. Include Scotland properly in the negotiations or you'll face a second referendum on independence. But after the 2017 general election, has the First Minister's bluff been called? And Nicola Sturgeon joins me now. You came down quite a lot of seats. You lost a third of your MPs. You lost 500,000 votes in that election. Theresa May, before her voice went, did say the word sorry. Are you going to apologise to your party today?
Well, look, I think the BBC probably needs a bit of a reality check. There was an opinion poll published in Scotland yesterday. The SNP is 17 points clear of our nearest rival. We're polling at a higher level a year after the last Scottish election. Well, when I became SNP leader, the SNP had 6 MPs in the House of Commons. We've got 35 MPs today. The 2015 election was an exceptional election, an exceptional result in the immediate aftermath of the independence referendum. But to have started with 6 MPs and to be sitting here now with 35 MPs, I would suggest to you...
No apologies, no contrition for what happened.
I regret every seat that we lost, and we reflect very, very carefully on that. Of course we do. But the SNP is 17 points clear of our nearest rival. We're polling at a level a year on from the Scottish election last year than we were a year after our election wins in 2007 or 2011. The Tories, who you've just been hearing from, are back in third place in the Scottish polls. So, all in all, the SNP is in a very, very strong position. My job now as SNP leader, as First Minister of Scotland, is to make sure that that trust we have amongst the Scottish people is trust that we retain. That's why just a few weeks ago I set out what I think was widely accepted as a very bold and radical programme for government for the next year, setting Scotland up for the challenges that we face over the next decade.
Well, we'll come on to all of that, but I think it's not a state secret that you and Theresa May don't have a very easy relationship. That said, when you watched her speech in Manchester, did you have a fellow feeling? I mean, it was a gutsy performance and very, very frightening to lose your voice in that way.
Of course, yeah. Look, well, firstly, just in terms of my relationship with Theresa May, I think there's many people who would probably say they don't have the easiest relationship with Theresa May. My view is very clear. We disagree on a lot of things, but we have responsibilities to the people we serve to try to have a working relationship, and I will try very hard to do that. I managed to do that with David Cameron, albeit we had big political differences. On Theresa May's speech, I would defy any politician to have watched her speech and not feel a sense of sympathy and perhaps a sense of, but for the grace of God, there go I. But I don't think it was the speech in itself that is the problem for Theresa May. In different circumstances, what happened in that speech would have been laughed off. The problem for Theresa May is that she is a very weak Prime Minister presiding over a deeply divided party. And if that was just a problem for the Conservative Party, I wouldn't be particularly bothered. But it's a massive problem for the country at the moment and for the livelihoods and living standards of everybody in the country.
There is one area where she feels triumphant and vindicated. You'll have seen her and Ruth Davidson holding each other's hands up and saying, "We saved the Union in 2017. That's true, isn't it?
Well, look, I think as people watch the chaos that's engulfing the UK right now, and as people look ahead and see the damage that is likely to be done by this unfolding disaster that is not just Brexit, but this incompetent, chaotic approach to Brexit being presided over by Theresa May, and Scotland being taken down that path against our will, then the case for Scotland's future being in Scotland's hands and us being more in control of the decisions that shape our destiny, I think that case becomes greater and stronger by the day, and it's a case I and the SNP will continue to make.
Let's talk about that. I remember very clearly at the beginning of the year we sat in Butte House and talked about this, and you were absolutely crystal clear that if Scotland is kept out of the single market, there will be a second independence referendum. And then you announced in March that was going to happen, and then the election came, and it was reverse haggis, if I could put it that way.
Not even sure what that is.
Well, you changed
I think you've been out of
direction.
Scotland too long if you're talking about reverse.
It's a Scottish version of reverse ferret. But you changed direction, and you dropped that. What was it about losing all those votes and those MPs that persuaded you not to have a second
my
referendum?
feeling in the general election campaign and in the run-up to that and the immediate aftermath of that was that people feel, and I think this is understandable, that there's so much uncertainty just now that making a firm decision about the timing of another referendum is premature. And that's why what I said after the general election is I won't give any further consideration to the timing until Brexit and the terms of Brexit become clearer, till we've got a clearer line of sight about what all that means for Scotland. It doesn't mean I will stop making the case for Scotland being independent. As I say, with the chaos that engulfs the UK now and Scotland being taken down a path that we didn't want to go down, I think that case becomes ever stronger.
Isn't the truth that people are scunnered, to use a Scots word, with the whole subject at the moment? They're fed up to the back teeth with talking about independence. They don't want to hear about it for a while, and you have heard that message.
There are many people, I think, in Scotland who desperately want to see Scotland become independent. There are others who are not convinced and who will never be convinced, and there are others who perhaps just think we need a bit of dust to settle on Brexit. There is perhaps an element of people being a bit scunnered with big decisions. We've had not just the independence referendum, but the Brexit vote, 2 general elections in the course of 2 years. So I understand that. Now, my job is to make the case, because I think the damage that is likely to be done to Scotland, to the whole of the UK, to be frank about it, is likely to be monumental. I don't want Scotland to have that imposed on it. I've also got a mandate to give people in Scotland a choice on this issue. But I will listen to what people say in terms of the timing of that. But let me stress this point, that the case for decisions that shape our future being in our own hands, not in the hands of this dysfunctional government in Westminster, is probably stronger than it's ever been.
You have always been crystal clear that from your point of view, for the Scottish economy, you need to be inside the single market.
Yep.
March 2019, that opportunity disappears.
Well, that may be the case.
So my question is, sorry, is there a possibility of a second independence referendum before that final Rubicon is crossed?
Well, I've said I will consider the timing again when we have more clarity about what we are facing in March 2019 than we do just now.
So you could have a second referendum before we actually leave the EU?
When I've said I will not consider the timing until there is that greater clarity towards the end of next year, it would, I think, contradict that if I was immediately to give, the consideration that I've said I will wait until that clarity emerges before doing. But let me say, I believe so strongly, not for ideological reasons, but for hard practical reasons, that it would be an act of, monumental folly for the UK to come out of the single market. I don't think it should come out of the EU, but I respect the fact that that is what the government is going to do. But let's stay in the single market and stay in the customs union, because it's in the overwhelming interest of our economy.
Well, that is not going to happen.
Do you know what?
You've been shut out of these conversations.
And can I say that reflects badly on a UK government, not on the Scottish government.
I'm not saying it doesn't, but you have been shut out.
On this point,
you can't keep us inside the single market. March 2019, it will be over.
That may be true, and we will all have to face up to the implications of that. But post the general election, my view is that we shouldn't simply accept that these things are off the table anymore. We all know what the arithmetic in the House of Commons is. I listened to Ruth Davidson saying she wishes we could stay in the single market and have the freest possible trade. Her MPs in the House of Commons could use their votes to swing the balance. And if they don't do that, then I think Ruth Davidson will have some very tough questions to answer. So the arithmetic of the House of Commons, I think the mood across not just Scotland but the UK is such that we should continue to argue for common sense here and not just accept that these battles can't be won. I don't accept that.
If the leader of Catalonia announces independence next week, will you recognise Catalonia as a free independent
what I think has
state?
to be recognised is the strength of feeling in Catalonia. I think it's now time for dialogue to replace confrontation. The scenes we saw last Sunday were unacceptable and should be condemned by everybody. But what now has to happen, in my view, is the Spanish government, which of course wants to uphold its constitution, and the Catalan government sitting down to find a way forward, one that complies with the rule of law, but one that also respects democracy and the right of the people of Catalonia to choose their own future. You cannot simply say that the right of a people to choose their own future is illegal in all circumstances.
So just coming back to my original question, would you recognise Catalonia as an independent country, yes or no?
we'd recognise the decisions and the statements that were made, but I'm not going to speculate here on what will happen in Catalonia before it happens. I'm not in control of that. It's not for me to decide what is the right future for Catalonia. But everybody has to recognise the reality of the situation in Catalonia. But the question here is, how is it resolved? My view is it shouldn't be resolved by both sides going further to extreme positions. It should be resolved by both sides coming together to try to find a way forward in this that respects all of these principles, the rule of law, democracy and the right to choose.
Was it a legitimate referendum, do you think?
Look, it was a referendum that lots of people voted in. Lots didn't, but lots of people voted in. Spain maintains it was an illegal referendum. That is, I understand that, and that's the position that the Spanish government takes. The point I'm making is, if Spain's position is that that wasn't a legal referendum, surely the question is, how can there be a legal way for people in Catalonia to express their view? Because you can't simply in a democracy say there is no legal and legitimate way for people to decide what they want their future to be. That would be an absurd position.
And
that's why I think
would you urge
dialogue...
the Spanish to facilitate that, as it were, a different referendum?
I think there's a duty now on Spain and Catalonia to come together to have that discussion. What is the way forward? It may be sensible to try to have some independent mediation of that, perhaps the European Union, which I think should have condemned the violence that we saw last Sunday and unfortunately didn't. But perhaps the EU not taking sides, but in the role of mediator has a role to play. But dialogue has to replace confrontation here.
Let's turn to domestic policy. You set out 8 targets for the NHS in Scotland. How many of them have you hit?
But we're not meeting all of the targets. Well, let me say, first of all, we're the best performing emergency departments in the whole of the UK.
Of the 8 targets, how many have you hit?
We're not hitting as many as I want us to be hitting.
Come on,
but
you know the answer. It's 1 out of the 8.
Let me say, we know, and Scotland's not unique here, we have rising demand on our health service because of the change in demographics of our country. Our NHS is in a transition phase as we try to reshape it so that more care is delivered in the community, so that we build up primary and mental health and social care services. So we're doing the hard work that's required to deliver that. We're the only government in the UK that has properly integrated health and social care. We're the only government in the UK that has taken concrete steps to build up elective capacity. We've put £3 billion more into the health service. There are 12,000 people more working in the health service. And as I started out saying, we've got the best performing emergency departments anywhere in the UK.
If you have the misfortune to get cancer in Scotland, the target was that treatment would start within 2 months. 2 months is actually 2 months is a long time to wait for treatment if you're in that horrible position. And you're not hitting that target, and the numbers are getting worse.
We've got 2 waiting times targets, one that goes from the point of diagnosis through to treatment, and one is from the decision to treat to treatment. In terms of that latter one, we are virtually meeting that target. In terms of the other one, we've got some issues around the speed of diagnostics. That's why we're investing more in diagnostics. We're looking at new ways for health boards to deliver on that part of the waiting time. But the average waiting times for both of those targets are well within those targets, and the vast majority of people in Scotland get very speedy access to cancer services.
When it comes to a young person with mental health problems, again, very vulnerable people, and you have raised this yourself, it's 18 weeks in terms of when they should start the treatment. And again, you've missed that target.
But we are progressing towards that, and we're investing more in mental health. Again, we have a situation here, and, I don't shy away from this, but Scotland...
10 years, I mean...
But Scotland is not unique here. What we have in mental health, and actually, I think politicians should have the guts to say this is a good thing. We're seeing reducing stigma around mental health, so we have more people coming forward. And we're building up, so we've vastly increased budgets in mental health. We've got more specialists working in our mental health services, and we are seeing progress towards delivering these targets in a way that we didn't see before. So I don't shy away from any of this.
Then there's the overall target, if I may, which is everybody to be seen in hospital within 20 weeks. And again, you've missed...
It's not the target,
12 weeks, I beg your pardon. And again, you've missed that target too.
But for the vast overwhelming majority of people, that target is met. Now,
20% it's not met. 20%, that's a lot of people.
When I was, health secretary at first, when the SNP first came to to power, the targets were much longer and fewer people were being seen within them than is the case today. We've reduced the targets, so we've made the pressure on ourselves and the system all the harder to meet. And we're actually doing better in terms of meeting those targets than previous governments were doing, meeting longer waiting times targets. Now, there is a challenge in health services across the globe from the changing demographics. I would put to you, and I would put to you very firmly...
They need more money, don't they, in the end? They need better funding.
Since the SNP took office, there is £3 billion more going into the health service than was the case. We have a commitment in this Parliament, and it was a stronger commitment than was given by any other party in the election to the Scottish Parliament last year, for another £2 billion of investment over this Parliament. We're also doing something that is quite hard to do. We're transferring resource from acute services into primary, community and social care, because we know that building up those services is the long-term solution to the challenges our health service face. So I would put it to you,
nevertheless,
we're doing better on these challenges than any other government anywhere in the UK.
But you set the targets, and you've missed them.
But
and part of the story is funding, whether it's the NHS, whether it's schools. You've been very critical of Tory austerity, but you've been very, very timid when it comes to actually raising taxes in Scotland. Well, are you going to raise taxes in Scotland?
We'll set our budget in the third week in December, and we'll set out our position on tax. But I've said very clearly that, and let me just take you up on what you said a minute ago. We took a decision in our budget last year not to give a tax cut that was being given by the Tories to the top 10% of income earners. So we've taken different decisions to protect public services, and that's why I think whether it's on housing, health, a range of other things, we are doing so much better than governments elsewhere in the UK.
But you have these new powers and you don't use them. You haven't raised taxes on wealth or income.
Andrew, with the greatest respect, I've just sat here and told you how we did use them. You can't then just say to me, I don't use them, because I've just given you the example of how I did use them. And in this budget, we've said, and again, this is, I think, showing an openness and a transparency and an ambition for the country that has not been seen in other governments in the UK, that it is time to look at whether we responsibly and progressively use our income tax powers more. And we'll shortly set out a discussion paper with the options in that and take final decisions in our budget. But the important point here is that about a third of our revenue in Scotland comes from income tax. 2/3 of it are still determined, of our overall budget, is still determined by decisions taken at Westminster.
But
so we need to see...
Obviously, you have control of the third, is the only point I'm making.
Yeah, but as the Fraser-Vallender Institute said just a week or so ago, the big decisions taken at Westminster still determine how much we have to spend overall. That's why I will never stop saying that austerity, this immoral, self-defeating austerity that the Tories have pursued, has to end, and I hope the Chancellor ends it in his budget.
You'll have seen, perhaps, I don't know if you have, John Major writing in today's papers, talking about the problems of universal credit, the way it's being rolled out as being cruel and uncaring, and calling for a review. Do you back him on that?
Yes, I think the Scottish Parliament voted for this just last week. The Tories voted against the proposition that there should be a pause in the rollout of universal credit. I've seen, in Inverness, for example, where universal credit has been rolled out early, there are people falling into debt, into rent arrears, utter misery being caused to already quite vulnerable people because of a reform that has been shambolic in its implementation. And I think it is cruel to press ahead with universal credit until that's fixed.
Can you explain to us sort of clearly and reasonably quickly
I hope so.
what your plan is for EU citizens in Scotland after Brexit?
Well, it appears the UK government is going to make EU citizens apply for what they're calling settled status and possibly charge a fee for that. They haven't said what that fee would be, but if it's the same as it is for residency, it'll be around £65. We will pay that for workers in the public sector. Why? Because it helps individuals, but it helps us keep vital workers in our NHS and public services, and it sends a message to EU nationals that we want them to stay here because we welcome them.
Nicola Sturgeon, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. That's all we've got time for. It's been refreshing, devoting